Welcome to the Bible Speaks. My name is Supreme, and today we'll be talking about those who dare to lead God. Now, this entire episode is based on First Chronicles chapter 13. We'll be making references to other books, but majorly talking from First Chronicles chapter 13. It's the story about King David returning the Ark of God from Abinadab's house to the city of David, along with Uzzah and some other children of Israel. Let's do a little background. So in this chapter, we see that David met the elders of Israel and he presented an idea that he had to bring back the ark into the city of David. The ark had been captured before by the Philistines, but then it was returned and it was in Abinadab's house. Now, David, being king, wanted to bring it into the city of David and restore it to where it ought to be. And this chapter, it's quite popular for the fact that God struck a man who tried to do a good deed. I'm talking about Uzzah, who tried to steady the ark because the cart stumbled and he got struck by God. So if you're like me, you'd have asked, why did God strike him? He tried to do a good deed. Why would God do that, right? And it's very easy to think that, and I'm not here to tell you that I have the answer to that question yet. Right, I'm not here to tell you that, even though I've wondered on it since the first time I read this story. But a different verse caught my eye as I read the story for the 18th time. And in all fairness, it's something that can easily be missed. And I'm not shocked that I've missed it all this well, but I just got to see it, a different meaning to it right now. And I would want you to join me as we go on this short journey to discuss this story. My focus is on verse 7, and I'll be reading from the Holman Christian Standard Bible, HCSB, or CSB. Right, and verse 7 reads, "At Abinadab's house, they set the ark of God on a new cart. Uzzah and Ahio were guiding the cart." Now, if we read it in another translation, that's the King James Version, the popular one that, we all know God spoke in King James language, right? Okay, so let's read in KJV. It says, "And they carried the ark of God in a new cart out of the house of Abinadab, and Uzzah and Ahio drave the cart." Now, when you read it in King James Version, it looks like Uzzah and Ahio were the ones pulling or pushing the cart. That's what it sounds like, but no. That's not so. It's not true, because when you go further and you read verse 9, you see that Uzzah tried to steady the ark because the oxen had stumbled. So they actually had oxen pulling the cart. I just needed to get that out of the way before we continued. So now that we have that clarified, let's get into the meat of verse 7, which is our focus for this episode. Now it says that the ark was in a cart. We know that it was in a cart, and we know that Uzzah and Ahio were guiding it, or they drove it. Now, ordinarily, for me, this didn't raise any eyebrows, right? But thinking about it, the ark represented the presence of God. It represented God. So in essence, Uzzah and Ahio were guiding God. And at this point, I think we need to make reference to another time when the ark was being moved. But that time, it wasn't the Israelites moving the ark, it was the Philistines when they were returning the ark to the Israelites. Now, let's do a little bit of Bible story. The Philistines captured the ark when Eli was priest, and they had a battle, and in that battle, Eli's sons, Eli was the priest, Eli's sons died, and the ark was captured, and Eli's daughter-in-law gave birth to a son and named him Ichabod, meaning the glory has departed. Right, so when the Philistines were going to return the ark to the Israelites after different plagues had hit them and their god Dagon had been smashed by the ark, they consulted their priests. You can find this in 1 Samuel chapter 6. In that chapter, you see that the Philistines consulted their priest on how to return the ark of God to the Israelites, and the priest counseled the Philistine people to send the ark away with an offering. But there was something interesting about how they would send the ark back. They got two milk cows, cows that had never been yoked before. That means cows that had never dragged the cart before. They were majorly used for producing milk, and they were clean. newbies to the cat pulling business, if you want to call them that. They were novices to the cat pulling business with no experience whatsoever. So the Philistines put the ark in a cart and hinged it to these 2 milk cows and watched for the direction that it would go. Now, when they watched for the direction that these cows would go, they trusted that the God of this ark, the God that this ark represented, would lead these cows to the right place. Now, don't get me wrong, because the Philistines seemed uncertain, because yes, it looked like they were fleecing, putting the offerings in the cart, putting the ark inside it, sending the milk cows on their way, thinking, okay, so if it goes the right way, it means the God of this ark was responsible for all the punishment, and then at the end of the day, if it doesn't go the right way, then so be it. Funny thing is, they only talked about the possibility of the God of this ark being behind the whole tumors and punishments that they had been suffering. They never said anything about it not being the God of this ark. And what am I driving at, right? When you bring this to the actions of the Israelites and the Philistines side by side, you see that the unbelieving Philistines appear to be more believing than the children of Israel by their actions. Even in their uncertainty, they believed that the God of the ark would be able to lead himself back to the rightful place without their help. Whereas the Israelites, who ought to be believers in God, tried to help God and treated God like he was incapacitated. All right, so enough of all this rigmaroling. Now, how does this relate to us today? How does the Israelites, the way the Israelites treated God and the way the children of Israel treated God, how does it relate to us today? Now, here's what came to mind. We as believers could also act like Uzzah, all right? We could act like the children of Israel, trying to guide God, trying to lead him by our own desires, right? Not trusting that he knows what is best for us, or that he knows the way to satisfying us, what we need best, in quote, what we need. Many times we don't trust that God knows what we need. We want to guide him. We want to help him, right? Another way to look at this is from the perspective of faith. For a long time, I've looked at faith as this thing that you as a believer must do. So in our application of faith, we force God into our own mold. We tell him what we want, regardless of if it is his will or not. We believe that as long as we faith it, then God must make it happen. That's like leading the ark. Our faith ought to be by grace, in submission to God, in submission to his will. Right? It's like the 3 Hebrew boys said in Daniel chapter 3. It says, our God is able to save us, but even if he doesn't, we are not bowing down. That's submission, right? They had submitted. They had absolute trust in God. They had absolute trust. That's something we talked about in the previous episode. If you haven't listened to it, please listen to it. Absolute trust in God. So we ought to be more like the Philistines in this verse in First Samuel chapter 6. We ought to be more like the Philistines, trusting God, that God knows his way. I mean, he created the earth, he created everything. He knows the way around this earth. He created us, right? He knows what we need part time, the phases that we are in and the phases that we'll be going into. He knows the end before we even begin, right? We should be able to trust God and not try to guide him and be too careful with him as if God were some whimpering little child. We should be able to express confidence and trust in the will and choice of God. Yes, we would want him to act in a way, but we must be open to him having a better way that it may not seem right to us. It may not seem right to the naked eye, but we must allow him guide our novice milk cows, if I should use that. Follow the Lord. He knows the way. And just like that, we've come to the end of this episode. I'm glad that I got the opportunity to share this with you, and I hope that you will allow God to do his work in your heart with the lessons that you have learned so far. You allow him to guide your desires, to guide your choices, to guide your prayers, to guide everything about you. I pray that you allow God to do that. And if you have any questions, any comments or feedback, please comment below or share with me via email at hellobiblespeaks@gmail.com. You can also send a voice message by going to anchor.fm/thebiblespeaks/message. You can also follow us on Instagram at Bible Speaks Podcast. All the links are in the description, so you can just find everything there. Thank you so much for joining me on this study. I would love to have you in the next one. I remain supreme.